Taking that, except one man found himself a prisoner, but he didn't know where, and he didn't know of whom. He did say, however, that it was a start. The sergeant said to the troops, "Let's be simple about it. If you're not conscious of consciousness, you're not truly conscious." Only the local is serious, never the universal. The king once said to a mystic, "I can't understand why you guys do what you do. Regardless of what you say, the only things that seem to have any meaning in this life is to get rich and powerful, because we're all going to die in the same way no matter what we did, and I can't see what you guys get out of what you do. I just can't for the life of me understand why you do it." And the mystic replied, "Me either. There was once two brothers, and the simpler of the two would eat and drink more than was sufficient, while the other one did so in ways non-physical. The mind can digest all that it intakes, but to progress further it must become aware of this ability. The local trains running in and around Paris seem mainly going nowhere in particular, only to periodically be interrupted by episodes of near track jumping, followed by a return to unexciting normalcy, which the writers appear to take as a form of advancement. Mentally, to have a problem is to name a problem, and to name a problem is to have a problem twice. Only things in part autobiographical are serious, nothing else. The God of one world decided to hold a contest for the people, that whoever could ask him the best question would win as their prize the answer to any question they had, other than the one that won them the prize. He called it the Get It Challenge. One man lives in a one-room cabin alone. In his earlier days, he'd lived with himself, but decided he'd be better off alone. But now he's beginning to feel the need to rethink his position, although he's not sure why nor where it might lead. We're born into mental confinement, and then a few carry it to an even greater extreme, though in such a way as to reshape what confinement actually means. The captain addressed the battalion. Being conscious of consciousness is comparable to the mind being conscious of the body, but on a higher level. Someone asked, because of his position within a closed system, is not everything that a man thinks perforce autobiographical? The operational distinction of a closed system is that it exists only via self-reference. Does this suggest a response to the man's question? And perhaps a further commentary regarding what man normally takes to be thinking. There was once a group of would-be mystical knights who understood. There was once a group of would-be mythical knights who undertook the search for the wondrous prize, and who soon split into two factions. The first dedicated to the actual possession of the Grail, while the others attempted to become so invisible as to render any discovery or lack thereof irrelevant. Non-existent hands to hold the chalice of illusion. The simple like gossip. The more sophisticated change its name to history. And the more civilized still call the whole shebang current events. Proposing apparently that they're current in their thinking and could recognize an actual event if they ever ran across one. To be conscious of consciousness is sort of like having a time machine that doesn't have anywhere to go. One day a man stopped and said to himself, "Which will drive you crazy first, hormones or neurons?" And as neurons replied, "We are ultimately at the mercy of hormones." And he and his neurons waited and waited and waited for a response from his hormones, but none was forthcoming. And finally, one day, far up ahead, the man grasped the proper lesson from hormones' failure to respond. One man's most recent definition of thought: someone else's useless commentary on your life. He admits he doesn't know who this someone else is, but says it's damn sure not him. Upon hearing this, a viewer wrote to say, "Why do men never question whether or not, for instance, that the liver or lungs they have are actually their own? Why does this subject of proper possession only arise regarding things mental?" The major so spoke to the army. There are two forms of consciousness possible. Each person is born naturally into the first form, which operates automatically and to which they give no particular notice. The other potential form is never activated unless you can cause a man to momentarily realize that first, that is, his normal condition. Those given to the transcendental pursuits are men who wish for certain ephemeralities to become specific fixtures. Life is not necessarily with or without meaning, other than as each individual's mind is made to worry that it is. Early one Thursday afternoon, one man paused and thought, "It wouldn't be so bad to learn that you had a terminal disease, because then you could live a totally dissipated life and it wouldn't matter." But suddenly realized that he was doing that already, and it didn't seem to matter. If it wasn't for some collective sense of morality or public structures of expected civilized behavior to lean on, ordinary men could barely stand and stay mentally upright. So consider the challenge before those who strike out individually on their conscious own. Everyone is Paris, and there is no Istanbul. Each traveler must invent it as he goes along. Only circumstances are serious, never life itself. Being less conscious than you normally are is an inexpensive hobby available to everyone. The attempt to move in the opposite direction, however, appears quite costly and damn near impossible, regardless of what its true nature may be. There are two types of warriors: those who think of battle and those who actually do it. To become the second, you must first become the first, but once you are the first, it's hard to ever leave. It is said that when you're sick, it's to your advantage to know just how sick you are. But how does this apply regarding man's dull level of consciousness? The dull need not reply. So pondered one man. How many years to get used to the rain? How many decades to the normal roar of life? Today's fairy tale. We're all born into a fairy tale. And you can either live out your life there, as is the norm, or you can construct a fairy tale to live out its life in you. Those who know a little something don't let metaphors run around without a leash. A man asked a mystic, "Does being more conscious make you a happier person?" And got replied, "Answering questions for sure won't." And yet another man asked a mystic, "How can you be sure whether you're talking to a real mystic or not?" And was told, "If you are, you're not, and if you're not, you might be." One man says that stories like this have almost stopped him from talking to himself. After some years involved in a certain activity, a man one day came to the edge of a high cliff and stood there alone before the naked, silent bluntness of the sun and realized, once you've said, "I'm alive," what more is there to say? One day a man walked up to a mystic and said, all that stuff about trying to become more conscious is just an excuse for not living an ordinary life. And the mystic thought, what a great line. Only thoughts are serious, never consciousness. Being the big boys and girls that our audience, I'm sure, of which I'm sure our audience is almost entirely composed, not decomposed, but composed. Perhaps I can speak of something having to do with this, and you understand that I'm not talking about me or you. But it has to do with the sorts of things we've been talking about in general, and specifically how man has what he's faced with when you try to do whatever the hell this is inside your own head or body, whatever part you find most agreeable to work with. No. I have tried to present it as not being a reaction against a problem. It does not mean that this was correct, incorrect, a good idea, a bad idea, but I will tell you life does not give out instructions as to how to do this, which is one reason that most apparent mysticism ends up being part of some so-called, or being part of, not just so-called, but some part of some kind of established lineage, so that someone can say, well, they feel confident, as much as a human normally does, that what they're telling you about some great mystical work in certain areas of the world, they say, well, what I'm talking about, if you question me, if you have any doubt, the point is our great prophet so-and-so said it. Some great Sufi, some great Zen teacher, Christ, Muhammad. That is part of the accepted structure of civilized life, even in arcane areas such as mysticism. It is true in quite ordinary, mundane areas, such as a man will stand up and profess, wave the banner of some political ideology. And someone can say, well, I don't like the sound of that, or where the hell did you get that? And the man says, well, you can't say that, or you should watch what you're saying, because I am simply paraphrasing what the great founder of our state, our nation, did. It is part of the ordinary human mind not only to not be creative, not to be original, and it's really a cheap shot to say that it shrinks from being original, because people do not even normally think about it. But they do, as long as your consciousness is just running on automatic, you do know not to stand out naked by yourself. Everyone understands that you're not supposed to be caught somewhere expressing some idea, assuming that it seemed to have some importance at the time, or it could have some effect on your life, that you're making some comment. It can be religious, political, social, to make a statement that is potentially controversial, and have the people around you to call your hand on it or to criticize it, and you to have no defense. And the defense that always works, and I say always works on the basis that it will carry you to tomorrow, that you'll survive to argue another day. The defense always is to be able to quote someone, to say, well, I am simply either quoting, I am paraphrasing, I am upholding something already established. Now, on that basis, ordinary people, again, without there being any need for people to consider it, have no idea, have no interest, have no notion of ever trying to think for themselves. That term itself is fraught with danger, because it's been used over and over that people don't think for themselves. That if you are a Catholic, or if you're religious, or if you're a Democrat, or if you're an ordinary citizen, or if you're just an ordinary person, that you don't really think for yourself. And that's an easy shot. It's like saying everybody's stupid. Everybody stands up and says, no, we're not. And you think, well, damn, I'm outnumbered. Because you say, well, people don't think for themselves. Now I'll say, well, we do. And you realize, boy, was I dumb? Boy, was I stupid? Boy, was I not thinking to stand up and tell people they don't think for themselves? I have attempted to get some people's attention, to offer some sort of hints and suggestions on the basis, though, of presenting this kind of thing without it apparently springing from, without it apparently being based upon opposition to something, which is damn near impossible. Operationally, de facto, it is impossible, because if nothing else, the unstated problem, the unstated something we're resisting is that whatever you're thinking now is not totally adequate, that there is something lacking in it, or why the hell would I be staying up here? Unless I was insane also. So anytime you tell somebody, well, here's a lecture on so-and-so, and it could be something as dull and dried as crocheting, or money markets, and you're saying that there's a problem with the people, you're saying that they do not have a full knowledge of the subject, or else you would not be presenting yourself. So there is that built into the structure of the human mind. And there's also built into the structure of man collectively that it is not the purpose, it is not the reality of the human intellect to ever reach a conclusive degree of success. And so therefore, in general, to speak to people on the basis, to make some comment that people are not thinking correctly, they're not thinking adequately, they're not, well, let's leave it correctly. That covers everything. That however you're thinking, in whatever way you're conscious of life and yourself, is not absolutely correct. There is a collective reality to that that's undeniable on the basis that no one thinks correctly. Because in this sense, to think correctly, you're insinuating that it is the intention, it is the purpose, it is a possible aim of each person's intellect, as it used to be called, their spirit, but that unique part of Homo sapien, which is the intellect, that it cannot be satisfied. That's not the intention. So to be able to turn to people and to say, naughty, naughty people, everyone is a sitting duck for it. Everyone will take a good solid body blow, as witnessed by the fact that everyone will deny it. Everyone will defend themselves as they're supposed to. But what I attempted to do was to keep people as much as possible from starting off on any specific, standing in any specific hole. Because if you start off on the basis of, well, there's a kind of reality behind all these ideas of increasing one's consciousness, and it's a good thing, at least that's the insinuation, it's a good thing by God that you found me so I can straighten you out. And it would actually, to make it more popular, you need to be a bit more specific about it. Just a few more words. But the more specific you are, the more everyone starts out in what appears to be a known, identifiable, and it becomes even more and more authentic to them in a whole. Which is simply to say that you start off on the basis that there is a problem. Which I repeat again, the mind has got to assume that something is lacking or it will not entertain new ideas. But if you make it specific, such as, at the ordinary level, all religions, as a rule, will say that their belief, that their their religion is the only true one. And so therefore, if you disagree with that, from their view, you start off in a strictly inferior hole. You start off less than up to speed. If you decide to convert to some religion, or if you decide to take up with some religion, and you heard them say that, and you did not have a full knowledge of the religion, it was a new religion to you, and you were just studying it, you would start off in the position of being a neophyte, a novice. You would start off standing in a hole. Do you understand what I mean? That if we say that whatever it is you're striving for is to be, and we call it on a nice solid foundation, to be a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian or whatever it was, then if you're not one, and you start off, by your own admission, by not being one, you're at least a step down. The more that you believe that you know where the problem is. There's a recent news item I read to you that I probably wrote myself, that one guy pointed out how great it was that at least once you can describe a problem, at least you're working on it. That is the norm. No one but an insane person would deny that to ordinary people, all the way from science to the soft sciences to the social sciences. Everyone will say that. Carpenters out in the country, illiterate, everyone will agree to the fact that, well, as long as you can identify the problem, one of the old phrases is, you're halfway home, but at least you're starting, as long as you can identify the problem. Yeah, that's true. But then the part that the ordinary people do not add to that is what I've already pointed out, that there's no final solution to any problem. That's not the point of the human intellect. So to say, well, now that we've identified the problem, by God, we're part of the way home. Okay. But don't overdo it. Don't think we're getting somewhere. You're not getting anywhere. I mean, you did something mentally, but say, now we're X amount closer to a solution. No, you're not. Nobody is. Nobody. That's not the purpose of the human intellect. You can see it Well, that being a theory, you can simply see that physically we have reached, in a sense, a kind of dead end. I shouldn't put it that way. We are satisfactorily developed, apparently. I don't mean by my opinion. You can go out and you can gain weight, lose weight, build up your muscles, do a little bit, but you're only going to live so long. You're only going to be so strong. Apparently men are never going to be able to fly by their own muscular strength. Now, I wouldn't be surprised, just by all accounts, that no one assumes that man will ever be able to run a 3-minute mile. There's just all sorts of things that we've reached. There's no problem physically. That is, in other words, physically for your time on earth, the body does reach conclusive success. Every time you eat and are satiated, every time that you sleep and you get up to live another day, every day that you live and survive, you have conclusively succeeded physically. But mentally, you're never satisfied. The mind never stops, and that's not the point. And so for a man to say, well, now we know the problem, and by God, we're getting somewhere. You've got to understand at the ordinary level, that's just as true as it can be. And nobody but just an idiot would deny that. And yet, it's meaningless. That if you try to get beyond the ordinary flim-flam of the human intellect, once you realize that at the ordinary level at which you were born conscious, there is no need, there is no expectation, it's not going to happen that you will ever, operating at that level, suddenly stumble upon the secret of life. Let's call it that. You'll never become enlightened by accident. Again, that's one reason that people like the so-called hallucinogenic drugs and even alcohol to a smaller level. It does not do it, but it can shake people sometimes apparently out of their ordinary level of consciousness. And it just gives a kind of minor, meaningless thrill. But back to reality, everyday, mundane reality. There is no way that a man is accidentally going to quit being mechanically conscious. It just simply can't happen. And you can see it or don't, or take my damn word for it, and I guarantee it. Nobody ever accidentally starts becoming conscious of their own consciousness. They do not. I was trying to lay the groundwork last time, if you recall. No one has ever, no ordinary person has ever gone to a psychiatrist or a counselor or a rabbi or a priest, but let's say a psychiatrist, and complained. I mean, in a rational way, but just registered a complaint that their mind is not active enough. That too often they lay down in bed and expect them to lay there for hours and have their mind just run, and many nights they lay down, as soon as they lay down, they go to sleep and wake up and don't even remember what happened. Nobody's ever complained about that. Nobody's ever complained that somebody cheated them in a business deal or somebody broke their heart in a love affair and that they walked away from it and never thought about it again. Or at least didn't think about it enough. Didn't, replay it enough in their head and seek revenge and think, boy, if I ever get the upper hand, what I'll do to that person. Nobody's ever done that. That was the kindergarten version of what I'm trying to get you to consider. It's just a simple fact. And I'm not going to carry it much further, but there are all kinds of sort of pathetic and silly stories that float around for years and years about people, well, they're in all religions, about people that seem to have been called by the gods wherein they had no interest in it. Does everybody know those? That just a guy, well, Christianity's got the great one of, what's his name, walking, persecuting the Christians. Peter, or whoever it was, walking along, and the gods, but all religions got versions of it, that God, Jehovah, just suddenly strikes him down and converts him over and makes him see the error of his ways, that is, makes him more conscious, and he had no interest in it. When he got up and suddenly realized, I'm a Christian, he was as surprised as anybody. He said, I didn't ask for this. I didn't do it for a joke. Every religion, let's take that. It is Peter, isn't it? Paul. But he's walking along, the story is, the road to Damascus, at least I remember that part. And the Spirit of God slew him down, and he was on the way to persecute Christians, to give them grief. And suddenly he goes into some kind of fit and he gets struck. In other words, he reaches a higher state of consciousness, wakes up, and he didn't ask for it, though. No. I'm going to leave it to you, though, as to why all religions have at least one story like that. All right, why all societies have at least one fairy tale about a little boy or girl that gets their wish. But anyway, it does not happen. And why I say it's sort of silly and pathetic is then when you find a few people, or if it's you, and you're devoting a large part of your life to trying to be more conscious and realize as simple as it seems, that's goddamn near impossible. And then they think there are people walking around thinking that the gods will whip it on you even when you didn't ask for it, just like, well, I've selected you and here it is. And you think, well, I don't know what to tell you to think. It's just... It's just if it do anybody any good, it's like you'd like to take everybody that believes such as that, all ordinary religious people, and you like to get them a big old bear hug and go, well, you sweet little things. I guess you could say, to take a cheap shot at our own expense, you almost envy them, like, you can actually believe that in some way you could be more conscious even when you didn't want to. That just happened to. God, but were that true? Is what you think when you hug them and go, there. Of course, you could think, does that actually happen? No, that was my guarantee. But what I started out to say was I was attempting to not give you a specific hole from which to feel like you were starting from. That has always, I would suggest to you, also been a consideration, whether these people existed or not, but all the Buddhas and the Jesus and the Moseses and Confuciuses and everybody, that once they understood what life was about and decided to talk about it, which is almost impossible not to turn around to somebody and say, Jesus, so to speak. Turn around to somebody and say, gee, or wow, would you be interested to hear something strange? All right, as soon as they tried a little bit, well, I'm lying now. Anybody that happened to it, it wasn't that big a deal. As soon as, it wasn't a deal like it just happened and then they didn't know what to do. When it did happen, then they realized, well, that's why nobody else could tell me what it was, and now I'm in the same position. But probably I'm going to fall into some kind of similar, if not trap, swampy area wherein I'll probably try to walk around and talk about it to somebody, and sure enough, they end up doing it. Then the question is, or the proposition situation that's normally unnoticed, I was going to point out that all of these assumed religious prophets and these founders of whole systems, which actually represent, as I point out to you, not just a formalized system of increased civil behavior and not a religion of worshiping and fearing extra systemic forces. What they originally started out doing was trying to show people how to understand what life was about. It's always that. But things have not changed that much. The human mind is still operating off the same kind of binary energy. And so they were faced with a situation. They can say, would you like to know what life's about? Would you like to be more conscious? Would you like to be happy or whatever? But everything you come up with is stated on the assumption to begin with that there is a problem. If you just said, all right, if we had some man that we'd never heard of in the past, and he thought, well, I'm going to stay away from all the religious ideas and et cetera, which is kind of a wasted story on my part because you've got Buddha already tried it, as I point out, and he was dead only a few hours, and they thought, now he's gone, we'll call it a religion and make some money and attract some real people. When he made a point, this is not a religion, I don't have anything to do with it. They died, made sure that he was good and dead, one coming back, and they went do, and they kept checking do. And it wasn't long, they turned into religion. And not just him, it was just the actual written record. I keep thinking that maybe some of you read as much as I have, or just as much as commonly available, and his was just the easiest record to read. The same thing with Jesus. It was, all of them had to die, and then they decided, now we can explain this in a different light. Now that he's not around to blow the whole thing. Now we can turn him into a demigod. Now we can tell exactly what he meant to everybody else so that he won't be here to say no. But at any rate, if you knew how to even read the records as they are, which you can always read another message into it, but the public, they take it as being a call. They take it as being that these people were called by the great God himself, called by the Creator himself. But if you can see it in a certain way, as I said, even doesn't prove anything, but even the records that are normally available, is the Buddhas and the people, or I was going to make up a guy you never heard of, let's assume he tried to stay away from everything that had been done, all religious connotations. He tried that there was a man somewhere, 300 or 400 years ago, somebody you never heard of, the latest in the line of those people, post-Muhammad, and that he had the same kind of understanding, same kind of enlightenment. He decided, all right, and he looked at everything that happened, looked at all the Buddhists and the history of everybody, and he thought, okay, I'm just going to I'll just ask people if they like to be happier. I'm just making this up on the spot. I could think up something else, more intelligent, but that's getting closer to what I've been trying. Well, let's say that this guy 200 or 300 years ago I made up, instead of asking, would you like to live forever? Would you like to be able to exercise control over spirits and harm your enemies and do good? Would you like to? He tried to get away from all the religious, all of the imaginary aspects of being more conscious as much as he could. Especially if he knew how to do those kind of gestures is the main thing. So let's say I'm just make up. So he decided, well, what carries none of the past specific verbal connotations, the kind of baggage. And so he said, all right, I have a kind of secret I've discovered about life. First he says, is anybody out there? He gets out in the town square and he says, would anybody like to be happier? You got almost everybody. Well, there's always a couple of professional soreheads in a village, but other than them, of course, it just makes them happier that you're now giving them something else to be mad about. But you say, would you like to be happier? Now, it sounds fairly innocuous, if that was the basis. But it implies that you're not happy enough now. And that is not going to kill anybody, because most people would line up and say, yes, I'd like to be happier. And then if I jumped in right quick, suddenly appeared out of nowhere, now, wait a minute. Do you realize you're admitting that you're starting off with a problem that you hadn't even been thinking about until he asked you, do you want to be happier? And you went, yeah. And you have now assumed a problem. Not that all of you are happy all the time, but you didn't go around, did all you people here, did all you go around thinking how unhappy you are? And they went, well, no. And you go, don't you realize what you're doing? He said, you want to be happier? And you showed up and went, well, yeah. Now, no offense, I don't know what he's going to tell you, but you have already placed yourself. You have voluntarily, mentally placed yourself in a position that you hadn't even thought about before, that you hadn't identified. You put yourself in a kind of hole and went, well, yeah, I'm not as happy, you know. It's like you crawled down a hole and you had to stand there for him to talk to you. He said, all right, do you want to be happier? And you went, yeah, but as soon as you said that, you went down and you stood at least down in a small hole, 12, 14 inches. Well, yeah, can you help me? And before that, you weren't in that hole. Well, you didn't identify being that hole. It becomes moot as to how happy you were. Nobody can prove it. But you did not identify yourself as being in a position wherein you needed somebody to instruct you in how to be happier. That was what I had been attempting to fight. It is a losing battle ultimately, because of the fact that the mind has got to feel that I'm pushing against something, or I wouldn't even be entertaining this. I wouldn't even be trying to listen to it. But if you identify it as being a specific problem, you have then, and without any analyzation, even me pointing it out, it's hard to remember. Without any analyzation, whatever the problem seems to be, you end up on the basis of believing that this up here, it is normal, that this, just as it is, or the human heart and spirit as they used to call it, is capable of conclusive success in your lifetime. And it is not. It just simply is not. And it's just obvious once you see it. That's why I keep making up or using stories and parables and throwaway lines having to do with what? Okay, merry-go-rounds and what else? Cannibalism. It just goes on and on and on. That civilization itself, the march, the forward march of the human intellect is more and more about more and more. Sure call, as opposed to that which most smartasses would assume I was going to say, that the whole thing of human intellect, the whole progress is just more and more about less and less. No, that's too cheap. It's more and more about more and more. That's what makes it, from a cursory view, from an ordinary view, so illusionarily rich and complex. That it is more and more about, goddamn, more and more, because the more and more there is, there's more and more for other people to disagree with, to criticize. Somebody say, well, I used to agree to such as that 5 years ago, but things have changed. And now I can no longer go along with that kind of view, because there have been too many. There were unexpected variables came in. We've made new discoveries. There are whole new philosophies about this. And then they can be attacked like, well, we thought you were some sort of leader. You can't have any faith in anyone who has no consistency. You're just saying because a few things change that you change your mind. A pox upon you. Nah. That's what it is. It's just more and more about more and more. And if I wanted to dig up Gertrude Stein, it'd be more and more about more and more about more and more about more and more. Ellipse into infinity. It will never stop. But with the mind having no continuing knowledge of that, that is what I was saying is the sort of invisible vapors was starting out with the assumption that there is a specific problem that should be identified so that we can get somewhere. That no one is conscious enough by God. Then you can get people to go, well, I agree, if they got any sense of what you mean. Or you could work them up to it and say, all right, everybody show up who's sick of, anybody that's ever thought that they were stupid, that they acted in a stupid way and then something real dumb and would like to stop it, show up. And almost everybody in the village will show up. And you say, all right, everybody has done stupid things, right? Everybody, sometimes you can just do things you can't believe how stupid you were. After you got through doing it, you would later, somebody might go, how in the world could you do that? And you go, dang, I'm the last one to ask. I'm as amazed as you are. If I go, yep, that's me. And you say, all right, let's, then you wouldn't ordinarily do that. No, I wouldn't do that. If you were just operating at the best mental level of which you're capable, that's been proven. If you're just operating at a higher level than you were that day, just that you're capable of being alert enough, smart enough, and non-stupid enough not to do the kinds of things that you say you've done, you are capable of not being that stupid, is the point. And they go, yeah. And then I could say, well, now I'm going to call that being more conscious. But it cannot be. The point is, you've already agreed you can be non-stupid. Let's say, a guy who just did something, a guy who was sharpening an axe, and somebody went by that owed him money, and went, and he got so mad he coughed his finger. But actually he turned around and went, wham, and you say, all right, if you had not been so mad and etc., would you have done such as that? And the man says no. He's the head of the village soccer team. He's a good physical man. Let's say he's a blacksmith. He is just as physically capable as a man could be. And normally, he doesn't walk around tripping. He doesn't get drunk and fall down the stairs and hurt himself. He is just a fine specimen of an ordinary physical person. And there he stands with that, and he looks at it. And every time he looks at it, if anybody mentions it, he thinks, how in the hell could I have been that stupid? And so you ask the guy, if you had been more alert, if you had been more conscious of what was going on, you were standing there sharpening that axe, yeah? And the person went by, you saw him coming, and you knew that, it wasn't a stranger you recognized. Oh yeah, I knew it was my guy that used to live next to me. He borrowed $50 2 years ago. All right, and so you saw him coming closer. You saw him come up the street, yeah? And you knew he might come close to you, yeah? So it was already up here. You knew, and you knew you were sharpening that axe right there by your finger, yeah? And you knew that you were inclined, that you could get all involved with some kind of internal dialogue or getting mad at him and turn around, and you could have gotten hurt. Right now, is that true? I'm just asking. And he would say, well, certainly, you know it's true. It's the only time I've ever done anything like that. So you could say, then if you had more control over your awareness, then that, if you call that a great example, or the greatest example of your stupidity, you would not do it. And he will say, well, no. And it's true. No, it's irrefutable. Because no one would have done anything stupid that they can now identify as stupid. That was dumb. And you say, well, if you had been paying more attention, most people go for that. If you had been more alert, if you'd just been paying more attention to what you meet at that moment, would you have done that stupid thing? Would you have thrown that empty liquor bottle out the window when you saw that cop car coming in the other direction and hit his windshield? If you had been a little more alert, wouldn't you have looked up and not done that? And he'll say, well, yeah. You do here easily, without any doubt. I'll give you always the weasel's way out. All but maybe 1% of intellectual stupidity, that is, stupidity, that you would call it, a person would call it, not me, that they would say that was stupid, like cutting off the guy's, he cut off his finger. Now he did it physically, but his body did not do it alone. That man, if his mind had not been interfering with his body, is when I was going through all that rigmarole about him being a fine specimen and playing soccer. He was a sort of man that, where his mind, had it been that his mind did not get involved with his physical affairs to that degree, he would have never cut his thumb off, his finger off, would have never probably nicked himself shaving, he would have never probably even cut himself. You understand? The body just simply has no interest in that. The body does not drag people to a psychiatrist's office saying, I'm engaged in self-destructive behavior. People can be, but they got to be double crazy to blame it on their body. Well, even ordinary life is arranged in such a way that psychiatry and ordinary people, if you're doing something like pulling out your hair or whatever kind of things that people do, or every day you stab yourself a little and bleed, no one, not even a crazy person at the ordinary level of neurotic, even they don't blame it on their body. It's not that nobody believes that their body says, stick me, stick me. Nobody believes their hair says, pull me out till you don't pull out your eyebrows. They know that it's the mind doing it. All right, that's all I want you to consider. So everyone, if it's presented in a certain way, will admit that what seems to be the problems they have, the stupid things that they do, is up here. And that all but 1%, for those of you people looking for a gopher hole, all but 1%, I propose, of all stupidity in human life is because of lack of attention. Not because I say so, because you can ask people. Remember that. I'm not here making a critique of life. I'm pointing out how it is. You ask anybody. Would you have run around and been unfaithful to your wife with that waitress if you had realized your wife was going to come in there and eat and you was over there in the corner smooching on her? Well, hell no, I wouldn't. Well, why didn't you think about it? I don't know. I've asked myself that 100 times. Why didn't you look to see if there was a cop car coming before you went, whee, without, empty vodka? And you go, I don't know. It is by all sane, ordinary people's own admission, by their own admission, that the stupidity in which they engage, the things that harm them, all the way from a ticket or a divorce proceedings to a lost finger, you can get ordinary people to realize it's not that big a deal to get them to, you say, you wouldn't have done that. Don't make an accusation. You just say, would anybody operate like that if they'd just been a little more attentive? And of course, most people got any excuse, like, well, when I threw the bottle out, I'd been drinking, and so I didn't have a clear consciousness. When I was over there, smooching up on that waitress over there, my wife walked in on me. Hey, you know how a man gets. You got manly urges, and it's like down in Alabama, they got sex gets on the mind, and the mind goes out the door. That kind of thing. So everybody can explain it, one way or the other. But at least even if that's not even the point, that they can explain it and excuse it. But you can get ordinary people to agree that if you just point out to them, or you say, would you have done that had you been more attentive just to the whole circumstance? And those examples I gave was good as any. Cough your finger, your wife, which you didn't intend, assume that you thought you were keeping a family together, your wife caught you making out with somebody else, or you threw an empty liquor bottle in the windshield of a cop car passing. Now, that about covers all three of those. Now, forget the excuses that you were drinking or you're so horny that you were in a daze. Forget the excuses. I know that people got those, but still, those same people, that they're now in their normal state of awareness, not drunk, and you say, would you have done that had you been more alert? And if they think about it, everybody says, no, certainly not. Now, let's skip the excuse of drinking, etc. The guy, he could have thrown an empty Coke bottle out the window and hit a cop car. And he'd say, you're right. I don't know. I was talking, we was having a big time, and I'd been drinking this, Coke and this pop, and I just didn't want my car. I just cleaned the car. It was out there in the middle of the desert. I shouldn't have done it. To begin with, I don't normally do it, but plus, you're right. I got to talking. I was talking to my buddy, and we were just having a big time. And I thought, well, one Coke bottle out here in the middle of the desert. And you're right. I should have at least looked up to see if any car was coming. I didn't want to hit somebody, but you're right. And I didn't even look up, much less any car, a cop car. So, in other words, yes. Or I'm sharpening the axe. You're right. Here comes somebody I hate. Right now, I think about it, and I had more sense. I should at least stop sharpening that axe. Everyone will agree, any sane person, that is a matter of attention. So you can start off, even if you attempt to do, as I was saying I have sort of done, is try not to give a firm or identify a strict, specific whole from which everyone needs to stand down and go, well, you're right, let's get at it, you're right. It still insinuates, without it ever being specified. If you just assume, there's something wrong, you are still operating with a certain kind of unseen burden, and that is that the ordinary state of affairs mentally are capable of reaching some conclusive degree of success. And that's not it. So, twist it a little bit more. Then what if somebody opened up a church, to use that example again, and says, everyone who'd like to be happier and don't want to die and rot in the ground and stink real bad and your friends forget about you, would you like to join up? Come over here. And everybody goes, well, yeah, me. And you say, well, you got to, start showing up here every week and bring me 10% of your money. And somebody says, well, can I ask a question? You go, yeah. And you say, well, so in other words, people that won't be happy and don't want to die and lose all their friends and be forgotten, then so if we come and do whatever you say, then you're saying that won't happen to us. And you go, oh no, I wasn't saying that. I just asked who was interested in being happier and not dying and all that, and you said you were. So if you want to, show up and I'll take your money and I'll talk to you. The folly, the foolishness being that no one would do it. It becomes more than a verbal, it becomes more than a rhetorical, problematic situation of me saying that if you identify a problem, or even if you operate on the basis that the mind is a problem, that it can be cured, that it is an unspecified, it is a lingering, tacit difficulty. It is not simply that vague, by the way. That's why I was going to take you a little further. Even if you don't name the problem, if you name the solution, you've done the same thing. I know. It's not all that weird, it's just unbelievable. Well, it's just you hear it and you go, what? So here we go. Even if you didn't identify the problem, if you identified the solution, if you just said, are you unhappy with life? Are you dissatisfied? And everybody went, yeah. And you went, have you tried all the local religions? And we, yeah. And everybody, they named all the great religions. You said, you've tried them all? And they went, yeah. And you've tried psychiatry and yeah. Well, are you still unsatisfied? And they went, yeah. And you say, okay. And I got to tell you, I got no complaint against any of those people. I'm not here in opposition to them. And so I'm not going into anything that I'm familiar with what they've been teaching, and I know about what you've been through. And I'm not going into that. They're simply just, they're doing they're grinding their axes in life. They're doing their job. But if you're dissatisfied with that, if you're sure, and they all go, yeah, well, we're ready for anything. And you go, okay, then you're at the right place, because I am here to teach the anything system. So I just made that up because they said, well, we're ready for almost anything. Oh, all right, I could have been more faithful to their response and say, all right, it's the almost anything system. You have done almost the same, or you have set up almost the exact same hindrance by naming the solution. How was that too strange? All right, can you imagine Christianity? Can you imagine the Catholic Church existing without the concept of sin? To be specific. You simply cannot. You don't have to be a Catholic. I just thought that would be the greatest example. If they said, well, there's nothing wrong with humanity. Forget all this idea about sin. This is a new version of Christianity, and it's called New Christianity. And it'll free you from all those past illusionary things. There was no original sin, and forget all that stuff. But Christianity is a real thing. It should have been. It got mislaid and it got misused. And so here I am to give you the new Christianity. It still wouldn't work. You cannot relieve people. You cannot verbally tell people that there is no problem, that there is no hole from which they should step. Because if you fail to do that, and you think, if anybody ever thought along these lines and thought, well, I'll skip the suffering part, I'll skip the problem part, I'll just go directly to things could be better. I'll just go to the solution. It's the same thing. All right, I'll try it again. I know I thought maybe asking, can you consider that the Catholic Church or Christianity, any religion, but Catholic Church could survive without the concept of sin? All right, in one sense, I can refine it better. I can make it even, I can slice the blacksmith's thumb down to the level of a cheap deli handling pastrami on 46th Street. I can slice it real thin. How about this? I pull out another example if you don't like the Catholic Church and sin, because this sounds as though we're moving out of such an area. The Western concept, as it's presented, of Zen, at least part of it. Let me just make it fast. That many of the main branches of so-called Zen is on the basis that we will sit that is the ritual. We will sit and try to be motionless and still the mind, but it's not because there's any problem. We don't do it for any kind of reward. We do it because that's what we do. And that there have been schools that would put it to you that way, or some teacher, all right, you can come, and all I do is I sit. And a few other people here with me. We sit motionless and quiet for 10 hours a day, and then we clean up the place, and we go to bed, and we get up and we do it again tomorrow. And you go, yeah, I want it. And you go, but let me tell you this. There is no purpose to this. The closest thing there is to a purpose is that we sit. That's the purpose. Anything else that happens, that was not the purpose, and I don't discuss it. I would suggest to most Western minds, at least, or, well, most minds, period. If they were confronted with that, they will at least politely ask for more, or decline, and or maybe insinuate they might come back. Verbally, words on paper, it is easier to read about. That Zen, for instance, is much more popular throughout the world, especially our part of the world, is much more popular than it is where it is. Because it is much easier to read a man, all these stories and the history and even currently of Zen writings are replete with such stories. As a man says, well, why should I sit? And the master says, no reason. Yeah, but you sit all the time, yeah? You've been doing it all your life, yeah? And you still sit 10 hours a day, yep. And you're telling me there's no reason, yep. But I can come join you, yep. And you're not going to tell me anymore, nope. Reading that, you sprang for $10.95 or $21.95, whatever a book costs, and you can read that and just have the little shudders and go, oh, God. Because that almost sounds as though, even without hearing my comments tonight, it sounds as though it is at another level. Because, in a sense, it is, verbally. Because it is not saying, well, man's no good, and you should come join Mother Church and straighten yourself out. This seems to start off on the other side of it. That, well, there's nothing wrong, there's no reason to do this, but we do it. And the only purpose of doing it is that we do it. Sure is easier to read about that and go, ooh, God, that'd be great, than it would be to sell everything you had or go to all the trouble to buy a $3,000 plane ticket and go find a school like that and find a guy that would tell you that in person. And you think, well, wait a minute. I was real excited. You know, here I am 20 miles outside of Kyoto. I finally tracked this guy down. It's costing me over here in Japan, $200 a day just, to stay at the YMCA in a flop house. And I met the guy. He was real abrupt. He wasn't even all that pleasing. I finally found him, and I'm not even sure that's the person that somebody gave you his name back in Teaneck, New Jersey. And you're not even sure it's his name. You said, is this you? And he goes, maybe, or yes. You're not even sure. But there you stand. You've spent a large amount of money. You had already told yourself, you had made a semi-serious commitment that if you found him, that you would stay there, if they would have you. That's always a nice way out, if they will have me, because if nothing else, surely it can be offensive enough that they'll say, get out of here, and you can go home and go, well, it wasn't my fault. At any rate, it is easier to read about a Zen monk saying that than it would be, I'm serious, I'm not making fun of anybody. Understand that you went that far, and you did meet a guy. And you would always be unsure. I reflect on it tonight, the man who wrote and says, how can you be sure if you're talking to a real mystic or not? And the mystic says, well, if you are, you're not. And if you're not, you might be. Well, some of you laughed, which kind of surprised me. Well, it was hard to hear is what I mean. It would be easier if you were sitting there reading it. The guy says, how can you tell for sure whether you're talking to a real mystic or not? And the mystic says, well, if you are, then you're not. And if you're not, you might be. You would be confronted with that. That even if you got to the place and they gave you this number, and we all know about street addresses and all in Japan, it would always be, I mean, the place is so far into Westerns' minds is one reason I would also suggest it has been of late so popular, philosophically and religiously. You would never even be sure you found the right place. You'd say, is this you? And you'd never be sure that he actually said yeah, and if he was, you'd look at him, and you wouldn't be sure. So anyway, and you say, but this is a place where you're interested in awakening and enlightenment. And he went, okay. And you go, well, what do you do? And he grabs you and puts your head in the door, and here's all these people sitting around. He says, we sit all day. You go, that's it. It looks like the very thing that you'd always imagined. It looks like the real thing, this great musty hall and dirt floors and everybody just sitting there. And you go, could I join? You go, well, there's an empty spot. And you go, and he says, you can come in, but I don't have more time to talk to you. We sit every day. When the bell rings, you come sit. When it rings, you get and you go and you eat. And that's it. And I don't have anything to tell you. There is no philosophy. And don't ask me the purpose of us sitting here. The purpose of us sitting here is for us to sit here. Now I got to go. What are you going to do? $3,000 or $4,000 in debt. The meter running $200 or $300 a day, and you think, oh my God, what is this? What I want? I mean, the guy looked at you dead in the eye and he says, I got nothing else to tell you, and I'm not going to have anything to tell you. We said, if you want to come join us, don't ask me the purpose of this. The purpose of this is this. The purpose of us sitting is to sit. Hurry up, I got to go. That would seem to be shaving it even thinner. That would seem to be a higher version. That would seem to be, perhaps you might say, a more expansive, if not enlightened version of Christianity, of religion in general. That they say, well, there is a serious problem, but we have the serious solution. That God has sent us here to straighten things out, or to offer you the solution. They're saying, at least literally, they're saying at the verbal level, that there is no problem. And yet we do this. But don't ask me what this is for, because they said what it's for. Then you got to say, well, it's because there is a problem. But it's still inherent in it. The mind cannot get away from it. There's one reason I went to the story, that you would stand there being a sane person, not just a Western mind, a sane person, an ordinary person. And you listen, they say, here's what we do. And it couldn't, don't let me overdo the sitting part. That's just what they happen to use. It could be that they all stand on one foot as long as they can every day, and they stare at a spot on the wall. That could be it. He said, we stand, we do, maybe they call it, we do the flamingo stare. But don't ask me the purpose of this. That's what we do. Now you've already asked him, are you guys interested in, like, the things Buddha and stuff was? And he goes, okay. And you go, well, how do you go about it? And he says, we do the flamingo stare. And you look and you see, and he maybe shows you somebody doing it. And you start to say something, he says, I don't have an explanation. This is what we do. And the purpose of the flamingo stare is to do the flamingo stare 8 hours a day. Do you want to come in or not? And I don't have anything else to tell you, and I will never have anything else to tell you. That's it. It comes very close, it would sound, comparably speaking, to the more crude, simplistic presentations of religion, that there is a serious, inherent, indigenous flaw in man, sin. And we have the serious solution, which of course doesn't work. But we have the serious solution. It's not supposed to, but it doesn't work. And then you find something that apparently says, well, there is no real problem, and we do this, and it doesn't work because there's no problem. And on paper, sitting at home in a book, that sounds fine. Until you're faced with, wait a minute, I'm going inside this dark building on the other side of the world where people don't even speak the language, and that's what they're doing in life. That they're saying, there is no problem, but we do this thing, and it doesn't work because there's no problem to begin with. Do you want to join us? I would suggest, it would not be completely unpredictable for a man's mind to have flashing words like crazy, insane. May I come back later? I'm sure that must be the wrong name. You're not him. It's just too much. So therefore, even when the words apparently would be in contradiction to the crude aspect of man has a serious inherent problem, sinful, and that religion is the cure for it, our religion, that even when it's presented on the basis that there is no specific problem, but we got to do something, so we do the flamingo stare, and it doesn't help. Of course, they will never tell you that because they don't think that way. But they would say, and it doesn't help. Well, I should have done a little more. They say, realize there is no problem. You can come and join us, but we don't deal with problems here. We're not here for problems. You go, okay. You want to hear the rest of it. He says, and you say, what do you do? What's your discipline? He says, we do the flamingo stare. And you go, does it help? And they go, help what? And you go, the problem. And they say, we don't have a problem. I told you that. And he's already began to get tired of you just after 30 seconds, 15 seconds of this shit. And he says, I already told you there's no problem. And you go, but what does that do? And he goes, well, nothing. You want to come in? Yeah. Now think about you. Think about what you're confronted with, all the times you try and go, well, let's see. Now what will I do today? There is only one thing to do. is to become conscious of consciousness. That's the only thing to do. The rest of it is the flamingo stare. Somebody copyright that quick.